That's not how I used to enslave pounds.
I'm gonna go poop and then I'm gonna shower and then I'll probably be on.
Okay, you do that, you fucking nasty weird man. You sing.
I gotta do it before my shower, you know what I'm saying? I can't do it after my shower, because then what's the point?
Bruh. Alright, what shall I be doing today? Weird gun game. Alright, what shall I be doing? Oh, that's an echo. Weird gun game. Oh, that's an echo. Echo, 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 echo. I don't know what to play. Play some Lethal Business. Nah. This is a really good game, but I guess it wasn't just, I don't know. Something. This is a good game. I don't know why. Also, W game. Just died. Like, really died. I wonder. Because no one is here, and I don't care. Okay, let's see. Robloxian. Hold on, let me put on some background news.
If you're still watching ads in 2025,
But I don't want to watch ads 2025.
If you're tired of being
wrong, maybe you're the wrong. Oh, didn't want to do that. Okay, I regret pressing on that.
I'm tired of shit.
Every single day, her.
Okay, that's kind of gay.
Hey everyone. Before this video starts, I wanted to take a moment to do a shout out for a family friend called D's Bees Honey, and you can see their website at dzbzhoney.farm and a ISBN number and 3,000 Amazon reviews. Of course, not all attempts at exploiting Andale's energy are so hackneyed. I had one guy turn up at my door and pay me $3,000 in cash just to show me the darkest corner in the building. I wasn't sure what he meant at first, thought he meant light and shadow.
Sort of,
he replied when I explained this to him.
Darkness like that can be part of it, but I'm looking for a corner. Has to be a right angle, or more acute. Ideally, more acute. You understand that term, right?
He seemed arrogant, and that last sentence confirmed as much. Good-looking guy in his late 20s, nice suit, looked like the stereotypical banker. Acted like one too.
There's plenty of places like that. Lots of funny rooms in Andale. People trying to make the most of limited space. Sometimes the walls meet at tight angles, sure, but I don't know what you mean about dark. There's the basement. It's flooded. Can you think of anywhere darker than that?
He bit his lip and hesitated for a second or two, as if he was actually contemplating it.
Not a bad suggestion, actually, but no. Too difficult to reach. And I don't just mean dark as in the absence of light. I mean dark like under the bed. Dark like that one chip in a wall that leads to a hollow space between the bricks. And as a child, you can't help but wonder what lives there. Somewhere that just inexplicably feels like it's not got as much of God's attention on it as everywhere else.
I thought about this for a second. His words were vague, but damn if I didn't know what he meant. A corner? I asked. Has to be an acute corner. He nodded. I think I know the place, I said, and he smiled like a real creep. I took him to a flat on the 8th floor. It was run down like everywhere else, but there was still enough of its old furniture lying around.
Okay, so
You could pull open random drawers in there and still see the cutlery people once used. There's even an old analog TV on an old stand. You can perch on what's left of the sofa and stare at that TV and get the feeling that you knew who lived there once. Run your thumb over the dials on the toaster, the handle of the fridge, or the glowing plastic of the light switch, and feel an aching loss that creeps up on you out of nowhere. Look up, and you'll see that that light fixture has been torn out of the ceiling, like something had tried swinging from it. Not a big place, by the way. 3 rooms. A bedroom with a double bed all rumpled up, a living room/kitchen, and a tiny little spare room that looked like it had once been used for storage, or a washing machine maybe, if you were single and childless. A sliver of space, a triangle carved out of whatever room was left over when the other, more important walls had been put up. That sofa I mentioned, and the TV, they were all placed so whoever was sat down could always keep an eye on that room and its contents. You see, they'd put a cot inside it, and it's still there, blue bottle flies circling overhead. You can't see inside the cot, not unless you went in and actually pulled the blankets out, but it's been decades, and no one has managed it yet. It's dark behind those old boxes, a heavy shadow that dissuades a closer look. Like there's something in there no one needs to see, and it spent a long time sat there, eating whatever little light there was. Even with the window in that room, daylight doesn't really filter down.
Perfect.
I
The businessman
hate.
said when he saw it. He gazed around the flat, one detail at a time, his head pausing for a moment, and a smile creeping across his face as he laid his eyes on the broken light fixture and the cot, the sight of it, the flies that still circled above faded Winnie the Pooh blankets. It made the breath catch in his throat.
Oh, this is it. Yes, this is good.
He told me.
Dark like under the bed. You've earned that money. I could have had a dozen men sweep this place and they wouldn't have understood the brief as well as you have. Thank you,
I replied, even if that wasn't really how I felt. Quietly, the man sat down and began to unpack his leather satchel. No pentagrams to be found, although he did unpack 7 strange-looking candles. He caught me looking at them and smiled.
Homemade,
He said,
each one shaped by my hands. I'm not a good artist, but it's the effort that counts. It took forever to rend the wax. Of course, that was the easy part. The hard part was getting the fat to make it. Did you know there can be a surprisingly high level of security around a hospital's medical waste department?
I didn't, I replied as he took out some flimsy bits of wood and a few small nails. He oh so carefully began to nail the splinters of wood together in what looked like random shapes.
Oh well.
He sighed after a few moments, his nails nimbly gripping the tiny hammer as he tapped away. Already, he'd put together at least 6 of the strange little wooden polygons, and with each new one, I felt a strange sensation.
Would you like to stay and watch?
He asked.
Absolutely not.
I answered. He stopped tapping and smiled once more.
Oh, you're clever,
He said.
That's the correct answer, by the way. And if I'm to respect it, I should inform you that now is the safest time to leave.
I made my way to the exit just as he lit the first candles, but not before I looked towards the cot one last time. I was surprised to see a hollow blackness that extended beyond the doorway. like a curtain had been draped across it. Only there was depth to it that drew the eye. The businessman paid it no attention, but after a few more seconds, he eventually looked up at me expectantly. Can I ask what it is you want? I said. Everyone who comes here, I don't get the sense it ever works out for them. I'm looking for a new kind of afterlife. Do you need one? We all need one, he said. But only those of us willing to take a few risks will get a better deal. Everyone else, he grimaced. It's worth the bother. But look who I'm speaking to. He looked to the darkness that enveloped the doorway. Shapes could be seen floating past. You should leave now. I pulled the door shut and, noticing that the sun was rapidly setting, ran to my apartment where I knew the walls would keep me safe. When I returned the next day, the man's satchel was still where I'd last seen it, propping against one arm of the sofa. The candles had burned down to the very ends of the wicks and left a lingering smell that's still there all these years later. And of the man himself, well, in the room with the cot, which still has bluebottle flies orbiting overhead, there is now a shadow burned into the wall. It's blurry and diffused, but vaguely recognizable as a man on his knees, his head pressed to the floor in a gesture of supplication. I've known it to occasionally move, to turn its head and look towards me, at which point my temples throb, my ears pop, and the darkness begins to encroach upon the edges of my vision. I never exactly considered that flat to be Disneyland before, but now I avoid it like the plague. Still, it could be worse. Not every ritual ends so cleanly, and at times I've had to personally intervene, something I hate bitterly. If people want to go poking around in the universe's undercarriage, that's their business. It's one thing if I've got to sweep up what's left of them afterwards, but at least that's a one-and-done job. Sometimes it isn't so clean. One guy turned up and told me he'd be a new resident, my neighbor, and we'd get to know each other. A bumbling old man with the look of a professor who was down on his luck. He sat up in the room next to mine, and no matter how little I spoke to him, he never really got the hint and kept trying to act like a good friend. Few times I did initiate conversation, it was to tell him that the place he'd chosen didn't have much in the way of protection. He pointed to some funny little rashes and told me they were his protection. Over the next few weeks, I'd bump into him from time to time, always on his hands and knees, scraping some dank corner or moldy pile of bumpy growths. He collected fungi, told me on the first day, and I'd often see him wiping his samples onto petri dishes that he'd whisper quiet words to whenever he thought I wasn't around. I didn't think he was sane, but he probably wasn't completely crazy because he lived long enough to get a sense of Andale and only come out in the day. Meanwhile, his apartment filled up with a growing collection of chittering terrariums and pickle jars, their specimens hidden by murky fluids. All over, he planted and cultivated strange mushrooms and molds. He encouraged them to soak up the darkness of Andale and set them to grow in the rife conditions he cultivated. Towards the end, his living room had mushrooms growing out of the walls, plaster crumbling beneath microbial armies until there was only concrete and rebar. And even then, mold continued to grow and thrive. A few times I peered in and found him feeding meat to the frilly growths that exploded out of the old furniture. During this time, the symbols on our shared wall would often grow hot, and I found myself having to replace them on a nearly daily basis as he tinkered away on the other side. I asked him once or twice to tone it down.
This is important work,
He growled, an unseen darkness creeping into his voice.
I'm not some ditzy crackhead trying to summon Baphomet. I'm not looking to get high. This is science. Progress. That is what I'm working towards. Yeah, well, your progress is trying to eat its way into my flat. Can you ask it to stop?
He stopped, froze in mid-gesture like I'd said something either profoundly stupid or insightful, or likely a bit of both. He looked at the rashes on his arms that had, by now, started to sprout some of their own strange fruit. When he finally spoke again, It was sly.
This fungi,
He said,
they had samples of it in the university for 30 years. Can you imagine? They never even realized what they had until I found it and unlocked its potential. Now I've finally found the source and I can do things no one else thought possible. This entire time, my thesis has depended upon the idea that the fungus has a capacity for information processing way beyond anything we've considered before. And your idea is a good one, you know. Asking it might just be an option.
He scuttled off without another word, and for the next few days, he set about the building like a furious little honeybee in spring, poking and prodding, setting trap after trap and cleaning them vigorously of any rats or mice he caught. When I did my morning sweeps, I'd found him hovering over Andel's latest victim, scraping what was left of them into transparent bags for his own purposes.
Don't mind me,
He'd mutter.
It's worthless to you. But these poor souls can help me achieve great things.
This persisted for another month. He no longer scraped mold or mushrooms off old apartments. He became interested only in me, and by the time it came to an end, I can confidently say that I have never smelled anything worse than the prickly, musty odor that wafted out from Andel's locked door. It became so bad that I began to wonder if I might have to ask the police for help and have him removed. And finally, scientist half grown into the wall. Algae and moss coated him head to toe so that he was no longer recognizable, but I had to assume it could be no one else. Wide eyes glared at me with terror and pain as nasty little creatures nibbled away at what was left of his shins. Meanwhile, strange tendrils prodded at his ears and head, never resting for a moment. He kept trying to speak, but the algal growths kept driving their way into his mouth until, one by one, they pushed too far and something snapped. His eyes went wider still. His squeals became hysterical, and his jaw slowly slid further down his chest until it hit the floor with a sodden thump.
Finally made contact?
I asked.
An awful idea if I've heard one. What would a mushroom have to say even in the best of circumstances? Let alone one that was grown in the ruins of Andel? I can only assume you never got around to telling it to stay off my wall, did you? No. You probably had your own reasoning for doing all this, and that's what took priority.
That made me wonder what it was he'd asked for. As the thought entered my head, I took a quick look around and tried to see if anything in particular stood out to me. Something was growing on the sofa and looked strangely human-shaped. It might have been just my imagination, but in the dark, it seemed to turn towards me. Meanwhile, the scientist continued to shiver in agony, his eyes focused on me and begging for help. I'll see what I can do, I said before slamming the door. Something about that strange pile on the sofa had deeply unsettled me. I put the word out, asked for a gun, but got a crossbow instead a few days later. A nervous-looking 16-year-old boy ferried it to my door. I was surprised he'd entered the building, but who knows who'd ordered him to do so. I've acquired a strange sort of respect among the locals, and it comes in handy. This boy looked like he would have stomped on my head and robbed me blind any other day, but when he spoke to me, he did so with more respect than I ever imagined I deserved. I thanked him and took the crossbow, spent an afternoon practicing with it, and then used it to kill the scientist the next morning. Took a few hits, but in the end, one thumped into his forehead and shut down his whimpered moans. I didn't see anything on the sofa this time, at least not anything human-shaped, which I guess I was thankful for. After that, it was a simple case of calling the police and beginning a long chain of events that ended with half a dozen men in hazmat suits spraying the room with noxious chemicals. For a while there, I'd been worried that they'd find a corpse and ask questions, but by the time anyone actually entered the room, there was nothing left of the scientist, save a splotch on the floor. I never did figure out exactly what he was after, although it is not uncommon for my morning sweep to turn up a body, or puddle, covered in fungal growths, and I've been known to occasionally catch glimpses of a strange person lowering themselves into the floodwater of the elevator shaft. Of course, I might actually just be making connections that aren't really there. All sorts of things live in that water. The entire level is flooded, and if something was down there, it'd have free reign over quite a lot of space. It's a strange world down there. I should know on account of one visitor who gave me a very bad time. I'll call him the fisherman, since he came to Andel because of the flooded basement. Saw a photo of him circulating around for a while now, if you know what I mean. God knows who took it and how, but it shows the stairwell into the basement, and beneath the brackish surface is a hand that's all out of proportion. Fingers splayed with perfect symmetry like a starfish. It is reaching out of the depths and resting gently on the third step below the water. When I first met him, he was sitting happily with his feet over the edge of the flooded shaft, water up to his knees, with a rod and line set beside him. It was quite a surprise at first, seeing him there with a little fly fishing hat, a chubby but healthy-looking man in his 40s with an egg mayo sandwich in one hand and a phone playing Candy Crush in the other. I called out to him as I approached because, in my experience, startling someone named Andale is bad for your health, no matter how soon you visit. He looked up when I caught his attention and smiled amiably.
Hello.
He waved with a sandwich.
You're the caretaker?
Yes, I am, I answered. And you are?
Just a tourist.
He smiled.
Care to join me?
The sun had risen only moments ago.
You weren't here when it was dark, were you?
I asked.
Introducing Blueprint AI,
Oh, no.
our
you
new
really just
experience
caught
to
me.
help you
Then
design
you
your
barely
website.
took-
Built by designers to put even more creative possibilities in your hands.
"10 minutes before you showed up. I was told you'd be willing to help in exchange for a small fee.
What sort of help? I asked.
Oh, just give me a nudge if any of the lines start moving,"
He said while pointing to a rod he'd set up beside the basement stairs. The door was propped open and the line led down into the darkness below, water gently lapping just out of sight. Another line had been set up in a corner of the lobby where the floor had been torn away, revealing a hole straight down into the basement.
I can't keep an eye on all of them at once, you see. I have bells ready, but, well, 2 heads are better than 1.
What is it exactly you're hoping to catch down here? I asked.
Are you familiar with the primordial ocean?
He said. The abyssal waters the gods split into light and dark and all that. It's not a physical location per se, but it does connect to certain bodies of water, depending on the time and place. The last recorded manifestation was in a glass of old whiskey underneath a forgotten bar in Mexico City. Some poor fellow knocked it over and didn't notice until the following day when half the bar was suddenly underwater. Quickly rectified, but some of the things swimming